forest went silent. No wind, no birds, just one sound, a woman crying deep in the trees. But when he followed the sound, she wasn't crying, she was laughing, and she had no face. Brace yourself for the literal terror I'm about to share with you. I'm not even sure if this is the right place to share something like this, but I have nowhere else to go. I need to get it off my chest. I have to. I've told everyone, family, friends, neighbors, even a few reporters. But somehow, it's never enough. I don't know how to explain it, but I feel this strange, almost urgent need to warn people, to tell as many as I can what's been happening. So here goes. It's November of 2019 as I'm writing this. This story goes back quite a ways. We're talking over 7 years ago now. I can't remember the exact year off the top of my head, but I'd place it somewhere around 2012, maybe 2013 at the latest. At the time, I was in my mid-20s. Life felt stable. I had a steady job, a long-term girlfriend, who's now my fiancée, and things were pretty predictable. I never went to college, so I'd been working full-time for a while already. My life wasn't on some wild trajectory, and because of that, I didn't feel any need to leave my hometown. That's why, around that age, my girlfriend and I ended up moving into the house I grew up in. My parents had kindly passed it down to me as a starter home, and we were grateful for it. It's an old brick house, really old. My dad had inherited it himself when he turned 40, and now it was my turn to keep it in the family. Sure, it had been renovated here and there, but no matter what you do, you can still tell how old it is. The brick gives it away. There are very few brick houses in our area, so it sticks out like a sore thumb. I kind of like that, though. I feel special. Speaking of our area, we live in a very woodsy neighborhood, so the houses are spaced pretty far apart. Our house is also the last lot on our street, so instead of bordering the woods on just one side, we border it on two. The woods back there is massive, and I mean massive. As a kid, my brothers and I would often go exploring in there, but no amount of aimless wandering ever got us even close to charting the whole thing. I'm sure some people would find that intimidating, but I've always enjoyed the wilderness, so it wasn't a big deal to me. Plus, I'm a guy who likes keeping myself, always have, so being isolated in my own little corner of the earth was appealing. Anyway, my girlfriend and I had been living there for a few months when all this started happening. It was sometime in the winter. I can't remember the exact month. All I know is that there was snow on the ground. It was sometime after 8 in the morning on a Sunday, the one day a week I got to sleep in. As I was getting in my pickup truck to treat myself to a coffee like I do every Sunday morning, I noticed something odd. In the driveway, right next to my car, there was what looked like a trail of footprints in the snow. My first thought was that my girlfriend had somehow woken up before me without me hearing her, and she came out to the driveway for whatever reason. But the more I looked around, the more I realized that was impossible. The path led across my front yard and through the hole in our side yard fence, meaning the footprints had originated from somewhere in the woods. On top of that, the trail didn't lead anywhere near our house, meaning they couldn't have been created by my girlfriend. I remember standing there, confused as hell. The trail didn't lead around our house or up to any of the windows, just the driver's side door of my car. That meant someone had walked directly from the woods to my car, only to immediately turn around and walk straight back into the woods. It was bizarre. I ended up asking my girlfriend about it later that day, but she obviously wasn't responsible for it. I wish I could give you more details about that first instance, but it was so long ago that that's about as much as I remember. It must have been at least 2 winters after that when the next thing happened. I specifically remember it being 2015 because that was the year my Seahawks lost the Super Bowl to Tom Brady. I woke up that morning and walked to my car. I think it was a weekday, but I'm not positive. As soon as I stepped outside, I instantly knew something was very, very wrong. There were footprints everywhere. I'm talking in the driveway, near all the windows, around the perimeter of the house. The yard was completely covered in them. I'm a pretty level-headed guy, so I'm not going to say I started panicking, but I'd be lying if I said I was completely calm in that moment. I was already late for work, so I didn't have time to inspect the prints very closely, but I didn't want to leave my girlfriends in a potentially dangerous situation. I quickly ran around the house and yard to make sure no one was lurking on the property, but that was about all I could do in the limited time I had as I was pulling out of the driveway. I texted my girlfriend about the situation so she wouldn't freak out. I ended up leaving work early that day, mostly because the situation was stuck on my mind. By the time I got home, my girlfriend had made some shocking discoveries. As soon as I pulled up, she beckoned me into the yard and pointed at one of the trails, saying it had been bothering her all day. At first I was confused, but then I realized what she was talking about. None of the footprints had left any shoe marks. I felt like an idiot for not picking up on it sooner. Whoever had left the footprints had been walking around in their bare feet. I was at a loss for words. Who the hell would walk around barefoot in freezing cold temperatures? My girlfriend suggested that maybe it was some kind of animal, but the prints genuinely looked like 2 human feet. We went inside and called my dad, but he said he'd never experienced anything like that in all of his years of living in that house. He told me to grab my rifle and try tracking down whoever had left the footprints. I really didn't want to, but I knew this kind of thing was my responsibility. My girlfriend wanted to call the police, but I knew that would be a waste of time. We had no evidence that a crime was committed, and I didn't think trespassing would warrant a search. I told her I'd call the police if I found something in the woods, and she agreed. Like I said before, that woods is its own world. So I told myself I'd turn back as soon as the sun started going down. I slung my rifle over my shoulder and headed out. I must have been following the trail for like 30 minutes when I noticed something really strange. Seemingly out of nowhere, the trail split into 2 diverging paths. I didn't know which one to follow. Hell, I didn't even know that was possible. I thought maybe whoever had left the trail had doubled back to confuse me, but then a scarier thought hit me. Was there more than one person out there? I was under the impression that I had been tracking one person this whole time. The possibility of multiple people had never even occurred to me. That was enough to shake me up, though. I wasn't fully comfortable knowing I could be outnumbered out there. I stood there a little while longer before deciding to turn around. It was getting dark anyway. As I was walking back, I couldn't help but think about those footprints. I felt like I would have noticed if two people were trying to walk in the same footprints. There's no way the person in the back could have done it without messing up at least once. And then I thought that maybe someone had walked backwards from deeper in the woods to make it look like there had been two people there the whole time. And then obviously there was the possibility that it was just one person who doubled back on himself. Maybe someone had been carrying another person on his back and just got tired. I really didn't know which explanation was the most disturbing. We did end up calling the police that night, but as I predicted, they told us there wasn't much they could do without definitive evidence of a crime. I told my girlfriend I was going into the woods again the next morning, but it snowed pretty heavily that night, so there were no prints to follow anymore. My girlfriend was obviously terrified, but there was literally nothing we could do. Luckily, that was the last thing that happened that winter. In fact, nothing happened for a few years after that. I would go as far as to say we had forgotten about the whole thing. A lot had happened since then. My girlfriend and I got engaged in that time frame, and we were focusing on other things. I wouldn't be writing this if the story ended there, though. What I'm about to tell you happened less than a year ago. It was just after the new year, so January of this year. One random morning, I woke up to footprints all over my property. Just like that, all the memories came flooding back. My fiance actually broke down in our bedroom, asking me if we'd ever escaped this nightmare. I didn't know what to tell her. It was actually worse this time. There were footprints leading to my shed, and a bunch of tools were missing. God knows what else those people had done. I was furious. I called up my friend Theo, explained the situation, and asked him if he'd help me. He's a big wilderness guy and a much more experienced hunter than I am, which is part of the reason I asked him for help. He agreed and drove over to my place a few hours later. My fiance was worried sick, but I promised her that Theo and I would be able to handle ourselves. We dressed for the cold and geared up, knowing we might be out there for hours. The reason I wasn't worried about the darkness this time around was because Theo had this really expensive thermal scope for his AR-10, which would allow us to see in low visibility. I never spent that much money on hunting equipment, so I'd still be blind. But it was definitely comforting, knowing at least one of us would be able to see. I won't sugarcoat it. I was pretty scared by the time we headed out. At first, Theo and I talked as we walked, but after 45 minutes, we were mostly silent. It's like the seriousness of the situation hit us both at the same time. I remember praying to God that I hadn't dragged Theo into some horrible situation. I'm not sure how long we walked after that. But eventually, the tracks once again split into two sets of footprints. We followed the one on the left for a few minutes, but at one point the trail just stopped abruptly. We retraced our steps back to the split, and Theo made a comment about whoever left the tracks really didn't want to be followed. I didn't want to think about it, so we just kept following the footprints in silence. I'm not kidding you. There were at least 3 other dead ends that forced us to retrace our steps, wasting valuable daylight. I remember thinking how remarkable it was that someone could walk backwards so perfectly that a trail of footprints didn't look like it had been stepped on multiple times. I'm telling you, it wasn't normal. The one upside, which Theo pointed out to me, was the dead ends likely meant we were tracking just one person. Eventually, it started getting dark. We were really deep in the woods at that point. I didn't recognize my surroundings at all. The trail of footprints didn't diverge for a long time after that. Theo said whoever we were tracking had probably given up trying to make dead ends. Another 5 minutes or so passed, and the footprints started getting noticeably deeper. We were getting closer. At one point, another set of footprints appeared right alongside the original. Theo cursed and whispered that he had been wrong and that we were probably tracking two people. The sun was basically all the way down now, so Theo was checking his scope every so often. The snow gave me some visibility, but I'll be honest, I probably would have turned around had it not been for Theo's scope. We were walking in complete silence. Out of nowhere, I felt Theo's arm reach against my chest, motioning me to stop. I looked at him, and he was looking straight ahead through his scope. I couldn't see what he was looking at, so I just kept looking at him. It looked like he was holding his breath. I had never seen him so still. After a good 20 seconds, he slowly made his way over to the nearest tree and crouched down. I followed suit, not even questioning why. He looked through his scope again, and I could see his hand begin to tremble slightly. Another 20 seconds of complete silence. I was dying of suspense, so I lightly tapped his shoulder. He lowered his rifle and silently handed it to me. I looked through the scope and had to fight back a scream. There were 4 figures huddled in the snow. At first I thought they were bears, but I quickly realized they weren't. They were human beings. 2 of them were large and hunched over, and the other 2 were smaller. The smaller ones were clinging to a nearby tree, wildly jerking their heads around. They were eating something. I couldn't make out faces or details. Thermal scopes don't give you that, but I could see enough to know they were naked. It was the most terrifying thing I have ever seen with my own 2 eyes. Eventually, the larger ones picked up the smaller ones from off the tree and placed them on their shoulders. They then began walking deeper into the woods. Theo and I sat under that tree for what felt like an hour. We didn't dare move until we were positive that there was no way those things could hear us. By the time we got back to the house hours later, I was surprised to find my fiancée was still awake. She told me she couldn't sleep knowing I was out there and asked what we found. I told her in as minimal detail as possible, but she was still horrified. We called the police that night and told us they'd search the woods the first thing the next morning. Theo agreed to stay the night so the 2 of us could assist the police in their search. The next morning, the police searched the woods with our help, but called it off after a few hours due to the partly covered up footprints. My fiancé demanded that they keep searching, but they said they couldn't sanction a huge search over some missing tools. I don't blame them, but it didn't feel like closure. Theo and I knew what we saw. Winter is fast approaching, and both my fiancé and I are worried those people are going to come back again. We're seriously considering moving, but haven't been able to get the ball rolling on that. I don't really know what to think. Like I said earlier, I've told everyone I can about what's been happening to us. It's literally been going on for years. None of my neighbors have ever experienced anything like this, which doesn't make sense to me. I don't know why my house is getting targeted or what those people even want. Some of my friends think they're harmless, but other people tell me I'm in grave danger. I think I'm going to try and seal off my yard from the woods, but I don't know what else to do besides that. Hopefully we can move out soon. But first, did you know that 98% of people who watch my videos aren't subscribed, that means you. And yes, I am speaking specifically to you. Probably aren't. So now would be a great time to leave a like on the video and subscribe. Anyhow, last summer, I decided to tackle a major section of the Pacific Crest Trail. I've always loved hiking, especially solo trips. My plan was simple. Park my car at the end of the section, hitch a ride to the trailhead, and hike back over the course of a little more than a week and a half. It sounded straightforward enough at the time. The first few days went smoothly, about how I expected. The trail was everything I'd hoped it would be. Endless stretches of towering trees and winding paths, cutting through serene landscapes. I'm in pretty good shape, so I don't have to stop very frequently when I'm hiking. I'm obviously not going to hike in the dark, though, so every night I had to pitch a tent to get some shut-eye. I've always preferred to keep a low profile, especially since solo hikers can attract attention. Because of that, I'd venture a little off the trail to set up my camp each night. I figured it was better that way, minimize the chance of a stranger stumbling across my campsite. Up until the third night, everything was perfectly fine. But what I'm about to tell you is the reason why I'm taking an extended break from hiking, or any kind of wilderness exploration for that matter. I woke up in the middle of the night with this odd sense that something was wrong. It was the kind of gut feeling you can't explain, but you know better than to ignore. I looked around my tent. Everything seemed normal inside, so I decided to have a look around the campsite. I drew my rifle, grabbed a flashlight, and unzipped the tent. There was no one out there, no one that I could see at least. I returned to my tent and started checking my pack. That's when I realized my wallet was gone. At first, I thought I'd just misplaced it. Maybe he'd left it outside the tent or buried it somewhere in my gear. But after tearing through everything, it was clear someone had taken it. My personal information, cash, credit cards, all of it. How was that even possible, though? Had someone broken into my tent just to steal that one thing and leave? It was unlikely, but randomly misplacing it was very uncharacteristic of me. I came to terms with the unfortunate conclusion that I had probably lost it myself. Things only got worse from there, though. Over the course of the next few days, I started to notice more things missing. Small items, seemingly random things. One of my lighters, my Swiss Army knife, a few energy bars. I knew I wasn't just misplacing everything. Someone was stealing my belongings. Part of me didn't want to believe it, but by the fourth day, it was undeniable. I was being stalked. There wasn't any cell coverage on that part of the trail, so it wasn't like I could alert someone about my situation. I remember contemplating turning back, but I'd only be saving myself a couple of days at best. There was no way I'd be able to hike either direction without sleeping, but I didn't feel comfortable pitching a tent in those woods with someone literally stalking me. It was a lose-lose situation. I remained calm and told myself there was a reason I had brought my rifle out there. And then it dawned on me. Why hadn't that person stolen my gun? It's almost as if they were deliberately messing with me that night. I tied my tent shut from the inside, hoping that would keep them out should they return. I tried to stay up for as long as possible, but I eventually fell asleep from pure exhaustion. My plan worked, though, because when I woke up the next morning, there was no sign that anyone had been in my tent. By then, the paranoia had set in fully, though. The solitude was getting to my brain, and every second of hiking was agonizing. I don't have anxiety, nor have I ever had it. But let me tell you, I've never felt worse in my life than I did over the next few days. Just imagine being in my position. No options but to continue hiking, despite knowing someone's lurking not far behind. The anxiety was perpetual, and I was unraveling. I can't explain why or how, but my mind started playing tricks on me. A rustling in the bushes turned out to be nothing. A shadow flickering at the edge of my vision vanished the moment I turned my head. The hallucinations got worse. I can't remember most of them specifically, but the one that sticks out the most is this. As I was walking, I felt myself step into an ankle-deep puddle of water that almost caused me to trip. I literally heard the splash and felt the cold water soaking my sock. But when I looked down, the ground was completely dry. I stood there in complete shock. It felt so real. I had no choice but to continue down the trail, as bad as the days were. The nights were always worse. I tied my tent shut and slept next to my rifle, but nothing made the anxiety go away. At one point, I had to splash cold water on my face to calm myself down. The hallucinations mostly subsided after that. I'm not sure what I would have done if they had continued. The next night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps walking around my campsite. I quietly grabbed my rifle, preparing to confront whoever was there, but my body was frozen in fear. Eventually, the footsteps faded into the woods, but there was no way in hell I was going to sleep after that. As soon as the sun came up, I packed up camp in a frenzy, my hands shaking so badly I could barely tie my gear. I couldn't stay out there another night. I was so close, probably a day and a quarter's hike away from my car, maybe less if I moved quickly. I decided that I wouldn't be stopping to sleep that night, that I'd pushed through the night to get off the God-forsaken trail as quickly as possible. I hiked for hours, as quickly as my body would let me go. When the sun started to set, I gritted my teeth and continued instead of pulling off to pitch my tent. By the time it was pitch black out, I was so close, probably 2 hours away at most. I kept walking, flashlight in one hand, rifle in the other. I started second-guessing my decision. I had never hiked in the darkness before, and I was not prepared for how difficult it was. That, in and of itself, was scary enough. I kept going, trying to keep my breathing steady. About an hour passed. I was getting closer, and then I heard it. Somewhere behind me, I was sure I heard footsteps. I spun around and flashed my light, and to my horror, I saw something slink behind a tree. The adrenaline took over, and I aimed my rifle at the tree. I demanded that they come out in a loud voice. The figure stepped forward. It was definitely a human, but when I tell you, it was the most barbaric-looking thing I'd ever seen, I'm not exaggerating. Words cannot describe what I was looking at. He was wearing nothing but a pair of my shorts, which I hadn't even realized were missing. His skin was scratched up in several different places, and his face was covered in hair. He started walking towards me, even though I had my rifle aimed at him. Before I could think, I tapped off a warning round next to him. He jumped at the sound and instantly retreated, sprinting back into the woods. I was in shock. Without wasting another second, I turned around and went as fast as I could. By the time I made it out of the woods, I locked my car doors and called the police. When they finally showed up, they told me that I shouldn't stick around. I didn't need to be told twice. I was out of there that night. The craziest part of the whole thing, in my opinion, was the hallucinations. I didn't think such vivid hallucinations were even possible. It's going to be a long time before I go hiking again, and I can confidently say that when I do, I won't be alone. I would advise anyone planning on hiking the Pacific Crest Trail to be extremely cautious and carry a firearm. This experience is something I still think about often. I apologize in advance if I mess up any details about the story I'm about to tell. This is something that my best friend told me multiple times several years ago now. It's one of those stories so unsettling you can't shake it even after hearing it more than once. My friend's dad was a logger, specifically a tree saw operator. For those who don't know, a tree saw is a massive machine capable of cutting down giant trees and slicing them to specific lengths. His job meant long, grueling hours, often alone in the deep, secluded forests of the Pacific Northwest. The way his logging crew worked, he was paid based on the number of trees he cut down rather than the hours he worked. So he would often push himself to work 16 to 20-hour days to finish jobs as quickly as possible. After he and his co-worker finished their part, the rest of the crew would come in to clear the felled trees and transport them to the mill. While he spent about half of his time working alone, the other half was spent with his friend Griffin, another tree saw operator. They used radios to communicate, especially when they worked on opposite ends of the same job site. A number of years ago, my friend's dad and Griffin were assigned to a remote job site high up on a mountain. It took the company over 3 weeks just to clear a road wide enough for their trucks and equipment to make it to the site. By the time they began work, they were positioned in an extremely desolate part of the mountain. They were already 10 days in, making good progress when they started hearing strange chatter over their radios. At first, the voices were muffled, just faint, static-laden murmurs that didn't make sense. They tried switching channels, but no matter what they did, the chatter followed them. Anyone who's used a standard radio knows how strange that is. It should be impossible for anyone to follow you when you're switching channels as they progressed farther up the mountain. The voices became more distinct. They couldn't hear full conversations, but based on what they could hear, they both agreed that the tone of the conversation fragments felt off. My friend's dad said it sounded almost casual at times, but the content was unintelligible. They also started finding strange signs that people had been there before them. Random containers, footprints in the dirt, and small makeshift campsites. Like I said before, they were in a place so remote it was practically inaccessible. So these discoveries were deeply unsettling. No one should have been up there. One day, Griffin came across a tent hidden just off a trail and called my friend's dad over. They decided to investigate. Inside, they found a single sleeping bag and a duffel bag filled with the most disturbing things imaginable. Multiple pairs of children's underwear, duct tape, rope, and crude sketches of children being molested. There were even photos of a fresh apple indicating whoever owned it had been there recently. Griffin wanted to pack up and leave immediately. My friend's dad, ever the workaholic, insisted they finish the job. They agreed to limit radio communication to emergencies only and decided to keep working. That night, they sat in the camper, unable to shake the dread that hung over them. The radio crackled to life again, and this time, they could make out snippets of a conversation between two men. They were talking about mundane things, collecting water and firewood. But the realization that these men were likely connected to the tent freaked my friend's dad out. Griffin wasn't as fazed, but my friend's dad was losing it. The next night, my friend's dad decided to confront them. When he heard the men talking about gathering bush for a fire, he grabbed the radio and demanded to know who they were and what they were doing there. The radio went silent immediately, and the men didn't respond. That silence was almost more unnerving than the chatter. Griffin was upset that my friend's dad had announced their presence, and the two of them got into a brief argument before deciding they'd escalate the situation the next day. Around midnight, Griffin shook my friend's dad awake, whispering that someone was outside the camper. The first thing he noticed was the soft sound of footsteps crunching on the gravel outside. Heart pounding, he fumbled for his gun, only to realize it wasn't loaded. He had no idea where his ammunition was. Griffin was unarmed, and the idea of calling the police was laughable given their location. They both sat frozen as they heard the camper door handle jiggle. The door creaked open, but didn't fully swing inward. Their camper was high off the ground, and there was no ladder or stool to climb up. Then came the scratching. Long, deliberate scratches along the outside of the door. 4 agonizing minutes passed. Finally, my friend's dad nodded at Griffin, signaling he was going to check it out. He moved quietly toward the door, gripping a flashlight in his shaking hand. Just as he reached the door, it burst open, and he was struck across the face with a knife. His pain was blinding. He fell out of the camper, hitting the ground hard. Before he could recover, a man was on top of him, pressing the knife against his neck. Another man appeared, kicking him repeatedly in the head. Griffin, without hesitation, leapt out of the camper and tackled the man with a knife. The second man bolted into the darkness, and the one Griffin had tackled scrambled to his feet and followed. They disappeared into the forest. Griffin helped my dad's friend back into the truck, and they drove 2 hours to the nearest hospital. It was bad. His face was a bloody mess, and there was a cut across his eye so severe it permanently damaged his vision. They reported the attack to the police, but nothing came of it. 2 weeks later, as the rest of the logging crew finished the job, one of their co-workers was found bound, gagged, raped, and murdered in a ditch. No arrests were ever made. To this day, my friend's dad struggles with PTSD. His right eye, with its disfigured pupil, constantly reminds him of that night. I'm sure he hasn't had a full night of restful sleep since. I've been terrified of deep woods for a long time now, mostly because of my friend's dad's experience. I haven't heard from my friend or his dad in years now, so I can only hope he's doing all right. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more amazing video. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. All right, that's it for today. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. I camped near an abandoned lodge when the door closed on its own, and I heard someone laughing in the woods. I ran. It was mid-2018. I was 23 and had driven down to Vermont to see my family and hang out for a few weeks. While there, I also wanted to go camping since my parents' house was just outside of the Appalachian Mountains when I used to live with them. Still, I'd go out all the time, but since I moved out, I hadn't had the chance to go out camping or even hiking at all. There was one place specifically that I'd had on my mind for a while. Just before I moved, I found a trail on a forum for people exploring abandoned structures, and I'd been wanting to check it out ever since. This trail supposedly led to an old lodge just right in the middle of the forest. So, on a Monday morning, I drove out there. I parked on the side of the road, and the trail was not marked or anything. This was clearly just some rough path, made by random people like me, wanting to explore the abandoned lodge. It was very overgrown though, so it looked like nobody had been down there in a while. The hike there took just under 2 hours, and while it was mostly flat, it was a pretty difficult walk because of all the weeds and bushes growing into the path. But regardless, I made it. Now my plan was to camp inside the lodge, because why not? But I came prepared with a tent and everything, in case it was completely destroyed or something. Good thing I did, because it was clear from the outside that it definitely wasn't safe to camp in. Most of the roof was gone, caving into itself, and the logs it was made of were full of thick vines and mold. The door was wide open though, so I peeked my head inside and looked around. It smelled awful. And with all the decayed and destroyed parts everywhere, there wasn't much access to anything that I could look around. There was a door on the far end of the main hallway that looked intact, and I was trying to get to, but it was a bit too sketchy to get there, so I ended up just backing out. From there, I didn't have anything else planned, but with the sun already starting to set, I began looking around for a good place to set up camp. There really weren't many options, so I basically just walked 200 feet out from the lodge and cleared a small spot to put my tent. As the sun set, the darkness slowly covered the lodge in the distance until I could no longer see it, and all the forest sounds slowly turned into crickets and the warm crackle of the small campfire I built. I really wanted to stargaze, but the spot I was in had trees towering over me, blocking most of the view. Plus, it was partially cloudy, so I just sat there, throwing sticks into the fire and thinking about whatever came to mind, until I heard something. I don't really know how to describe it, but it was pretty loud, maybe like wood bowing or bending. And even though I couldn't see the lodge anymore, the sound came from right where I knew the lodge was sitting in the dark. It only lasted a few seconds, but it sent chills through me. Maybe it was just the old wood bending and creaking in the wind, or maybe it was something else. I sat and listened for a while, like 30 minutes, without hearing anything else. It was only an hour or so into the night, but I knew if I didn't check on it now, I wouldn't be able to sleep later. So I figured I might as well go look around while it was still early into the night. I fueled up my campfire with some more sticks before leaving so I wouldn't have to rebuild it. Then I grabbed my small LED lamp and walked in the direction of the lodge. After only a minute of walking, the structure faintly showed up in the lights. It was as creepy as expected. I walked up to it cautiously, passing by a couple destroyed windows and holding the light up. Inside, it was extremely dark. Even with the light, it felt like I could barely see anything. When I got to the door, I was startled for a moment. It was closed. I'd been here less than 2 hours ago and left it wide open. Then I noticed something else. There were scratches, like from nails, or maybe a knife, all along the front face of the door. I didn't notice them last time, so I wasn't sure if they were already there or had just happened, and were maybe the sound I heard. I debated for a second whether or not I even wanted to try opening it, or if I should just leave, but it was all for nothing, because when I eventually decided to open it, I couldn't. It felt like something was holding it shut from the other side. I got really unsettled and didn't stay any longer. I backed away from the lodge and rushed back into the woods toward my campsite. However, I immediately noticed something was wrong. Aside from my lantern, there was no light coming from the forest. I started to hurry, hoping I was still going in the right direction. Luckily, I was, and a minute later I made it back to my tent. A column of smoke filled the air above what was my campfire, as if someone had just abruptly put it out while it was still burning. I looked around, just standing there, holding my lantern up, barely able to see anything in the trees. Hello? Hello? Who's out there? Nobody responded, starting to feel chills run through me again. I knew it was only a 2-hour hike back to where my car was, so I quickly decided to pack and head out. I took down my tent, and as I shoved the few remaining things into my backpack, I heard something nearby. I stopped for a second and held up my lantern, but still saw nothing. It sounded like someone was laughing. It was quiet, and not like someone laughing with their friends or anything. It was a single person, softly laughing under their breath as they watched me from behind the trees in the dark, like they were insane. I hurried up, leaving scraps behind and booking it to the trail. With my crappy lantern, it was really hard to follow the path, but I did the best I could. Several times I stopped, thinking I heard that soft laughing and worried I was being followed. But whoever it was stalking me out there, they were blending in with the dark perfectly, as I never once even caught sight of them. I got back to the road, getting in my car and driving away. I look back at that experience 7 years later as the single most disturbing and horrifying experience of my life. I don't think anyone can truly understand the feeling of helplessness I felt being out there in the forest in the middle of nowhere at night and stalked by some insane person. Maybe they set up home in that abandoned lodge? I really don't know. But from everything I saw and experienced there, I don't think anyone should go back to find out. But first, did you know that 98% of people who watch my videos aren't subscribed? That means you. And yes, I am speaking specifically to you. Probably aren't. So now would be a great time to leave a like on the video and subscribe. Anyhow, I was hiking to a fairly well-known overlook just outside of Glacier National Park in Montana. It definitely wasn't as great as any of the views within Glacier National Park, but it was just a normal trail with no rules or anything. Also, it was just before winter, which around here is off-season for most hiking and camping, which meant nobody would be out. I didn't mind the cold, so it was nice to have the trail and the overlook to myself. I finished hiking up there at just about 5:30, so it took nearly 6 hours. Pretty much, there was this large grassy opening on top of the mountain with a couple stone circles for making campfires and setting up camp around, and a little further up was a stone cliff that provided a view of the whole valley of mountains and forest. You could actually probably see Glacier National Park from there on a good clear day. Anyway, as expected, nobody else was at the campsite or at the overlook. I set up all my stuff by the stone circle closest to the overlook and made myself a quick dinner, then went to sit on the edge of the cliff to watch the sunset. I will say, there was a bit of a drop below the overlook, which was kind of daunting at first, but the sun setting over the mountains made me completely forget about it. I sat there and watched it for a whole 30 minutes, until it passed the horizon and got dark outside. Feeling good, I got up and turned to walk back to my campsite, but almost jumped back when I saw a man standing right behind me in the bushes near the edge of the forest. He was looking right at me. But what made it really creepy was as soon as I saw him, he just turned around and left right away. I couldn't see much of him since it was pretty dark out and he was in the bushes, but the man had no backpack on. So I thought he must have gotten to the campsite just after me and set up his stuff already. From where I was on the overlook, I could really only see my setup and none of the other parts of the campsite. But when I got closer, I still didn't see anything else. And the way the guy went into the forest was not in the direction of the campsite either. I thought it was really weird, but went on with my night. I put some dry sticks into the stone circle and lit up a campfire, then set up my mini camping chair and sat by the fire. I didn't have much else to do that night. I honestly had no plan for this trip. I just wanted to come out here and relax all day and night and enjoy the forest. So that's what I tried to do. Several hours went by. I think it was getting to be around 11 p.m. when I heard footsteps somewhere in front of me. Of course, I couldn't see anything, but it sounded eerily like human footsteps, one after the other, not too far away in the woods. Pretty soon after hearing them, I called out, asking if someone was out there. The footsteps stopped for a moment, like they hesitated, and then began walking again. But whatever it was out there, they didn't respond, even though it sounded exactly like human foot. Without being able to see them, and without them responding, I had to believe that it was just an animal, like maybe a deer or something, because if it was a person, surely they'd respond, but also it made no sense for anyone to be walking around right now. Eventually, the steps faded out, though. Another hour went by as I sat by the campfire. I didn't think the footsteps had me too nervous or scared, but they must have, because I was still very awake, like definitely not able to sleep, even though it was past midnight already. After a while, I knew I wasn't going to bed anytime soon, and I was getting bored, so I walked out to the overlook to see if maybe the stars were out. I left the fire going and got up, walking over to the cliff. The skies weren't too clear. However, the moon was shining down enough to cast a glowing light over the mountains and forest. The breeze was calming and quiet, moving across the valley. I stood there for maybe a minute before suddenly multiple sticks snapped behind me and a bush aggressively rustled. I spun around, seeing that same man from earlier, but he didn't turn away this time. He moved through the bush and started quickly walking up to the overlook. I began asking what he was doing out here, but the guy just talked over me, holding this disturbing fake smile as he kept moving closer, saying random nonsense and keeping from answering any of my questions, or even acknowledging anything that I said. The way he was coming at me was terrifying, and I tried to move to the side, but he was quick to get back in front of me. And suddenly, in the heat of the moment, I realized what was about to happen. He put his hands out and lunged at me, trying to push me over the ledge. Thank God I was prepared for it and had a stable footing. And I was a bit bigger than the guy, so I shoved him back and moved away from the cliff. As he stumbled, I tried to run back to the campsite, but he caught up pretty quick. This time, he didn't try to hide his intent. His face was horrifyingly angry and full of rage. I can't even imagine how lucky I was that this guy didn't have any form of weapon on him, because he definitely wouldn't have hesitated to use it. We wrangled around for maybe 30 seconds, but I kept getting the better of him. The guy was pretty skinny, like he hadn't eaten in a while, but he was just dead set on taking me down. After a few attempts, though, he was finally beaten enough to run away. I didn't even try chasing or keeping him pinned. Way out here, it just wasn't worth the risk. I got everything together, put on my headlamp, and left the campsite. I made it about 2 hours back down the trail before my headlamp's batteries ran out, so I set up a mini camp in the woods and waited for sunrise, then finished the hike back. I put a report in and talked to a lot of people about my encounter, but everyone has different thoughts as to what the man was really doing out there. All I know is I could have lost my life that night had I been any less careful. This was last year in the summer. I was out on a trail backpacking to a small camping spot with my dog Rocky. He's an Australian shepherd, so a medium-sized, really smart dog that comes with me everywhere I go, always loving running around and hiking through the woods. This place we were headed to was one I'd been to 3 or 4 times before. I loved it because it was isolated and never had anyone else, so Rocky could be free to run around, off-leash, and enjoy himself. The campsite was 8 hours down trail, so by the time we got there, it was just an hour or 2 before sunset. The campsite itself wasn't anything special or picturesque. It was just a small opening with nothing but trees all around. I found it calming and nice to hang out in, and safe for me to let Rocky roam around while still being able to keep an eye on him. I tossed my pack down and started to set everything up, which is when Rocky usually does his little patrol around the campsite. I saw him sniffing around and go a little ways into the woods, while I continued to put our tent up, then unpacked the rest of the things into the inside of the tent. About 15 minutes after arriving, Rocky came back to the campsite, but he was acting strange. His tail was down, and he came right up to me, then turned and faced the direction he just came from, looking out into the woods. I almost never see him act like this, unless there was a thunderstorm or something he was afraid of. I stood up and looked out where he came from, but saw nothing. I then checked him, making sure he didn't step on something and hurt himself, but he was completely fine, just anxious for some reason. It was pretty off-putting, especially from a smart and capable dog like Rocky was. I kept on the lookout as I finished setting up the camp and getting the campfire built. As I did, Rocky never left my side, not to explore or anything, just followed me around and kept his eyes on the woods. I will say, every time I looked back to check the woods, I felt a strange, uneasy sense, like I was being watched. I put it off as Rocky just making me nervous, since I didn't actually see anything. But it never really left my mind. I got the campfire going just as the sun fell past the top of the trees, covering the woods in a dark shadow. It was quiet, as it always was, but I didn't feel as calm as I usually did. I figured I wouldn't, though, because of Rocky's unusual behavior, but hoped tomorrow things would be more normal, and we could go back to enjoying our time. For the night, though, I just tended the fire and hung out with Rocky beside me, listening to the sounds of the forest. But then, just about an hour past sunset, Rocky suddenly perked his head up and froze. He stared anxiously out at the trees, ears up and tail between his legs. I looked out, but the darkness engulfed the area, making anything past 20 or 30 feet completely concealed. He started quietly whining, locking his gaze at the darkness behind the trees. Trusting him that something was wrong, I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it out there. Not seeing much, I started to walk a little further in. Rocky followed closely behind me. I didn't want to venture too far away from the campfire, but from the maybe 50 feet I walked out, I saw nothing in the woods. We went back and sat down. Even though I didn't see anything, I knew Rocky wouldn't be doing this for no reason. But it seemed most likely, and I guess I just hoped, that it was just an animal of some kind walking around the area. We weren't in bear territory, but I still carried bear spray on me, which would work on any animal, so I wasn't too worried for our safety. Rocky stayed on high alert all night, but didn't have any more sudden moments, and a couple hours later, we got in the tent and went to bed. I could tell Rocky was tired, probably from all the anxiety he was going through, and I was glad to see him close his eyes and fall asleep within 15 minutes. I did the same soon after. This might sound strange, but during that night, I remember having a dream about walking through the woods at night. I was alone. Rocky wasn't with me, and I was just walking through the trees, not on a path or anything. In the middle of that dream, I started to hear a high-pitched noise over and over. It kept going until suddenly I shot awake. Rocky was nudging my face with a snout and whining in my ear, making that high-pitched noise I was hearing in my dream, immediately making me realize that he'd been trying to wake me for a while. I sat up and grabbed my flashlights, feeling the nerves as I unzipped the tent and stepped out to look around. I turned on the flashlights, prepared to scan the area, but immediately when the light came on, it lit up a person right in front of me, like maybe 10 feet away from the tent. They had all black clothes on, with a hoodie draping over half of their face, only showing their distressed beard. I quickly noticed a reflection coming from his hand, though, seeing the small blade of a pocket knife shining the light back at me. In that instant, I just froze up, like my whole body went through a sudden shock. The man froze for a moment too, but then started to step forward again, when Rocky began growling. Up until then, I hadn't even noticed that he'd come out of the tent and was standing right next to me. This made the man hesitate, giving me more time to collect myself and quickly reach into the tent for the bear spray. By the time I was back up, Rocky was aggressively barking and moving back and forth, putting himself between us. The man didn't take any more steps forward and just turned and ran into the woods. Thankfully, Rocky didn't chase after him. I started taking everything down and packing as he kept his head up and circled around the campsite, guarding the whole area. Once packed, we started back down the trail. Honestly, even with my adrenaline still flowing through the entire hike back, I wasn't all that scared, knowing how well Rocky handled the situation. We made it back safely and got out of there. I did what I could to report the incident, but I think because of the location and everything, it wasn't really investigated. Anyway, I've gone on several camping trips since then, and Rocky was back to his normal self, happy and exploring the forests as usual. At least now I know that if he doesn't trust something, it's best to just get out of there. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more amazing video. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. All right, that's it for today. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. There was no trail, no reason for anyone to be out there, but I saw smoke. Then I saw him, just standing in the trees, watching me. He never moved. Hours later, I saw his face again, 10 feet from my tent, half hidden behind a bush. I was out camping in a familiar forest in Colorado. I lived a couple hours away, but came out every couple months when the weather was nice. I'd already had my camp set up and was there for 2 full days. I spent those days getting the tent situated and going fishing, not really doing much else. On the 3rd day, though, I set out on a hike just north of my campsite. There were no trails out there, so I was just going partially up the mountainside in a general direction. I knew all the landmarks near my camp and had all the necessary equipment to make sure I didn't get lost, so I was just enjoying the walk. It was probably a little past midday at this point, and as I walked further up, I noticed a column of smoke coming from behind me. It almost looked like it was coming from right by my campsite. I walked around to try and get a better view, and as far as I could tell, there was something burning either at my campsite or somewhere in the close area. I quickly made my way back, worrying about what it could be, but I knew that I hadn't left the fire going, so I really had no idea. Once I got about a quarter mile away from the base of the smoke, it became more apparent that it wasn't directly from my camp. I made it back to confirm, and nothing was wrong with anything. The smoke was coming from somewhere very close, though, just far enough into the trees for me to not see anything. I thought about going and seeing what it was, but the only thing it could be at this point was someone else's campfire. It was strange that someone happened to be out here in the exact place I was, because, again, there were no trails leading to this specific spot. But I definitely didn't want to run into some random people out here, so I stayed at my camp. I didn't really think much else on it. I just went on with my day and did some other things around the camp. Probably an hour passed before I casually looked around and felt my body stiffen when I saw a man standing in the forest. It was so unexpected, and the way he was standing seemed like he was just looking at me. Being so oblivious, I had no idea how long he'd been there. I lifted up my arm and did a nervous wave, but the man didn't wave back. He was too far to see if he was actually watching me, but he was definitely facing toward the campsite. After a minute, I went back to what I was doing, but I kept my eyes up and checked every now and then, and the man stayed in that same spot for almost 15 minutes before he was finally gone. That had really creeped me out. There just didn't seem to be any reason for someone to be acting like that. I waited a few hours, watching my surroundings the whole time, before walking over to where I'd seen the man standing. I wanted to see if there was something there that might have had his attention, but I didn't see anything. It was just another part of the forest. I went back to my camp as the sun was beginning to set. I tried to tell myself there was nothing, and I was overthinking all of it. But the more I really thought about it, the more I got creeped out. By the time the sun had fully set, I still hadn't seen anything else, though. I was sitting right outside of my tent and got the fire going. I don't know how long I was out there for. At least an hour before I noticed the flickering light to my left. It was from another campfire out in the forest close by. Oddly, it wasn't in the direction I'd seen the smoke coming from earlier in the day, though. It was near where I'd seen the man. I stood up, now feeling that unnerving sense building up in me again. Looking closer, I could actually see the base of the campfire, but it didn't look like anyone was around it. I moved my eyes around the dark forest, carefully scanning the entire area. And as my eyes moved around, I saw something else. Behind a bush, only 10 or 15 feet away, I could see a face looking back at me. My heart stung from the immediate stress and fear that ran through me. For the few seconds I looked at them, though it seemed like the figure didn't think I could see him. He was definitely looking back at me, but remained completely still. I took a few steps back, standing behind my campfire and keeping my eyes locked in the direction of the man. The most terrifying 30 minutes of my life passed extremely slowly before I saw the figure begin moving back, making his way further into the forest. They stayed crouched and moved slowly, all the way back until they were fully covered by the dark in the trees. I remained with my eyes wide open and shifting around in all directions for the whole night, not seeing anything more. Once the sun was lighting up the forest enough, I packed up and headed out, walking as fast as I could until I made it back to my car. Whatever was going on out there was far too suspicious, and something told me that staying there any longer would only put me at risk of finding out the extent to their likely harmful intentions. But first, did you know that 98% of people who watch my videos aren't subscribed? That means you. And yes, I am speaking specifically to you. Probably aren't. So now would be a great time to leave a like on the video and subscribe. Anyhow, I'm a 26-year-old male, and this happened last year. I was taking a vacation alone, and one of my friends owned a cabin near the area I was planning on visiting. It all worked out really well and saved me a ton of money, which I was super grateful for. This cabin that they owned, I'd never been to, but I'd heard my friend talk about it a lot, and I'd seen pictures. It sounded like the most cozy and relaxing place in the world, and that's exactly what I wanted out of this vacation. It was very isolated. I'd say about 40 minutes outside of the closest town, which felt pretty far for me, though a lot of that time was due to it being located on a dirt road that you'd have to drive really slow on anyway. When I arrived, I must have spent a whole hour just standing outside and looking off in the distance, enjoying the nature and quietness. Afterwards, I made an early dinner and was on my phone for a while, then decided to use up the rest of the daylight with a short walk. There were several small trails right next to the cabin that I'd noticed when I was standing out there. I texted my friend to make sure they were actually trails and wouldn't get me lost, but he assured me that I had nothing to worry about. He said the closest one to the back of the cabin was just a straight line through and out of the woods. That sounded perfect to me, so I put on some walking boots and started down the trail. It wasn't the smoothest walking trail, but it wasn't all that bad either. It definitely wasn't anything I could get lost on, and that was my only real concern. I walked for probably just under half an hour, looking at the nature around me and letting my mind wander, until I heard something that confused me enough to get me to stop. But as soon as I stopped, it went quiet. Then, just a moment later, I heard it again. A man's voice speaking loudly with a harsh tone. It sounded somewhat far, though. I looked at the woods around me, trying to locate where the man was. I heard him speak again, somewhere far off to the right of the trail, but I still couldn't see him. It sounded like he was talking to someone, though, or yelling at them. I didn't want to leave the trail, but something about this made me think there was something wrong. I didn't know if any other cabins or houses were out here, so there was no way for me to really know if it was unusual for anyone to be by this trail. But them not being on the trail made it strange. I listened for another couple minutes, hearing the man several times speak angrily towards something. It wasn't in English, so I couldn't understand him, and strangely, nobody ever responded, at least not loud enough for me to hear. Eventually, I decided to walk a bit closer to try and see who was there. I didn't want to make myself known. I just wanted to be sure that nothing crazy was going on. I was careful to not lose sight of the trail as I walked deeper into the woods. But once I got closer, all of the talking and yelling stopped. After a moment, I started to get really uneasy and jogged back to the trail. Everything going on just gave me the sense that I was in danger, and being out in the woods was probably the last place I wanted to have that feeling. The sun was beginning to come down as well, so that was my cue to get back to the cabin. I walked quickly, and just a couple minutes down the trail, I heard leaves crunching from the woods. I jolted my head around, but shadows casting from the trees made it difficult to see clearly. It sounded like someone was running behind me from somewhere out in the woods, not too far away. I turned around and ran the rest of the way to the cabin, getting inside and locking everything up. I looked out the back window and immediately saw a man walking toward the cabin. He was wearing a thick hoodie and had something in his hand. In a quick and desperate moment, I made the decision to grab my keys and run from my car at the front of the cabin. I got in and drove off, not seeing anyone follow. After talking with my friend, he made it clear that nobody should have been out there. What that man was doing or who he was yelling at is unknown. But if I had stayed in the cabin, I probably would have never been seen again. My friend and I lived in a small town outside of Seattle, and for the prior few years, we'd both gotten really into camping, hiking as well. But there was something about setting up a camp and just living out there among the wildlife that hit differently. When this happened, it was spring of 2021. We had planned out a typical camping trip not far away. But with our schedules at work being a little mismatched, it took a bit of finessing to figure out a good few days to go. In the days leading up, though, my manager had to push back my requested days off by a day, which messed everything up. I told my friend, who I'll refer to as Brandon, and he said it was all right since it was just a day off, saying he'd hike out there and set up camp and just spend the first night alone. He insisted on it and said he'd enjoy it. So, who was I to stop him? He let me know when he got there and set everything up, and it all seemed good. On the following morning, I drove out and started making my way to the campsite. This wasn't really a common place, mainly because there were so many other campsites around. But it still had a well-made trail and a cleared-out site that was made for campers to stay at, so it wasn't just some random spot in the forest. I texted him while I was on my way, but lost service before I was able to receive anything back. During the walk, though, there were several times where my phone had gained a bit of service, and I still hadn't gotten a text back. I thought maybe he was having service issues, or possibly it was something wrong with my phone. But basically, there were a million reasons why I didn't get a text back, so I wasn't too surprised. But once I got to the camp, something was missing. Brandon. I checked the tent in the nearby areas, but he wasn't anywhere. I still wasn't too worried. I knew there was a few places around that he could have gone. a nearby river for fishing, and a couple trails with nice views. He really could have been anywhere. I put my bag down and set up my tent, then got a fire going to heat up some canned food I'd brought with. It was only noon, so if he had gone to the river or down a trail, he probably wouldn't be back until 3 or 4. But once 5 rolled around, I started to get nervous. I tried to see if I could make out any shoe prints to show which way he may have went. But honestly, I had no idea. There were a ton of shoe prints all over the area that had no clear direction. My phone had no service still, so there weren't many options for me to go out and find him. My only logical choice was to stay where I was and just hope he came back. Hiking out when the sun only had another 30 minutes of light left was just asking for a disaster. I put some more wood into the fire and sat down, hoping for the best, but uncontrollably fearing the worst. I didn't know if he'd gotten hurt, lost, or was just enjoying himself on a hike. And that's when I saw a light flash by a few trees ahead of me. It moved around like someone was walking with it, and it was near one of the trails. I felt some relief, thinking it had to be Brandon. It came closer, getting brighter, and even close enough for me to hear footsteps in the distance. But then, all of a sudden, right before I thought I'd see who it was, it shut off and the footsteps stopped. "Brandon!" I called out. It was silent. No movement or response. My stomach tightened and I called out again. "Brandon! Who's out there?" It remained silent, furthering the disturbing gut feeling I had. To make it all worse, I stared into the darkness, waiting and listening for over an hour, hearing absolute silence. Aside from the sounds of the woods, I never heard the person leave, but I could feel that he was still out there watching me. I got up and started packing my things, going quickly while still watching my back. Something in me just told me to get out of there and find help, so that's what I did. I don't think I was followed, as I made it out without any more incidents. But police weren't able to help me until the following day. We went back out there, finding everything how I'd last seen it, but Brandon was still gone. They tracked him going off one of the trails and deeper into the woods, showing another set of shoe prints right next to his. Unfortunately, Brandon never turned up and the whole thing went cold after a couple days. It's believed that he was likely taken by the person that was out there with him, and that was likely the same person I'd encountered. It's just terrible thinking about whether things would have ended up differently if I had been able to go with him on the first day, or if I too would have gone missing. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more amazing video. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. Alright, that's it for today. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. I woke up in the middle of the night, and they were already there. 15 human-shaped shadows in the trees. Not a sound. Just eyes in the dark. Waiting. Me and my older brother Cameron were doing a camping trip on the East Coast. Cameron chose the site and everything like he usually did, and I just tagged along. He chose well, though. The campsite was really nice, and since we had the hike to get there, it wasn't crowded. There was nobody around from what we could see. The campsite wasn't very defined, though. It was hard to tell if we were even in the right spot. There were several openings in the trees that looked like they could have been the place we were supposed to be at, but neither of us thought it mattered. We set up on one of the grassy openings, and while we initially thought this place wasn't very active, we started to notice we were wrong. There were leftover things scattered around. Nothing big, like entire tents or anything, but just small things, like a trekking pole or some old shoes. It wasn't normal for these things to be left behind, though. Not at campsites like this that were far out. We both thought it was weird, but we went on with our day. We didn't really do much, just hung out and talked. When it got darker out, we lit up a fire and sat around it. A couple hours into the night, I happened to spot something behind Cameron. I pointed it out, not sure what it was. Both of us looked, and after a few moments, we were able to tell that it was a small campfire. It was really far out, impartially blocked by all the trees, but the tiny orange flame was flickering in the distance. Had it not been for the moonlight being covered by the clouds and the absolute darkness of the woods, there was no way we would have been able to notice it. I guess we weren't alone, though. It was a little odd that they were out in that direction, because it seemed like it was just forest over there. No openings or anything to really set up a campsite. Maybe they wanted to be away from other people or something. We didn't think about it too much. We got some snacks and drinks out and talked ourselves into exhaustion. We put out the fire and went to bed around midnight. I fell asleep pretty comfortably, not having any trouble at all. Though I woke up at some point in the night, it must have only been an hour or two after I'd gone to sleep. I knew exactly why I'd woken up, though. I drank a bit too much right before bed. Needing to relieve myself, I got up and unzipped the tent. I walked out maybe 50 feet from the campsite to make sure I didn't attract any animals, and did my business. But as I was out there, I noticed the flame way out in the forest was still lit up. Maybe it was because I was tired, or just out of it for some reason. But I stood there and stared at it for a minute. I don't even know why. But my eyes began adjusting to the dark as I stood there, and as I looked out into the woods, I suddenly noticed something else. It looked like a figure somewhere far out between me and the distant flame I was looking at. I felt a shock for a moment, but I told myself it couldn't actually be a person, and had to be a weird-looking bush or something. Like, there was no way someone was out in the dark, outside our camp, at this time of night. But I kept looking, trying to make out what I could, when I started to notice more of these figure-looking shadows in the woods. They were so far, and it was so dark, I couldn't tell if my mind was just playing tricks on me. If they were people, though, there were at least 10 or 15 of them, and they seemed to all be looking right at me. Another shock ran through me. What the hell is this? I almost thought I was hallucinating. I turned around and hurried back to the tent. I debated for a second whether to wake Cameron up. I knew if it was nothing, I would never hear the end of it, but my gut was telling me otherwise. I opened his tent and shook him awake. He was really confused at first, but I just told him I thought I saw something and wanted a second opinion. He hesitantly got up and I started to lead him out to where I was, but we didn't get very far. The figures I had seen had moved. They were closer, standing all spread out among the trees. I really hoped at this point I was just seeing things, but I slowly looked back at Cameron and could see the pale, fear-covered expression on his face, his eyes wide open. He saw what I saw. I looked back out, and it was more apparent than ever that these were people. I could see their subtle movements as they stood there and watched us. We backed up towards our tents. Should we leave? I can still vividly remember Cameron's shaky voice as he spoke those words. He was always so confident and sure of what to do. It was terrifying seeing and hearing him like that. I nodded, and neither of us grabbed any of our stuff, aside from the car keys and our wallets. We hurried away and down the trail. It seemed that they didn't follow us. We reported what happened to the police, feeling it was necessary. They didn't take it too seriously, though, very clearly thinking we were crazy. Like there was no way a whole group of people were out in the woods at night messing with us. We thought about the strange amount of left-behind things we saw in the area and had hoped others had already gone to the police about similar encounters, but nobody had. There were no official accounts of anything happening there. Maybe they just went unreported, or maybe nobody ever made it back to report it. But first, did you know that 98% of people who watch my videos aren't subscribed? That means you. And yes, I am speaking specifically to you. Probably aren't. So now would be a great time to leave a like on the video and subscribe. Anyhow, this was 2 years ago, in the middle of spring. I had taken time off work to go camping at a small lake in northern Minnesota. It was a place I'd been to a couple of times with friends or family that decided to join me, but this time it was just me. The hike to get there took about 2 hours, but it wasn't too rigorous. Mostly just flat trail all the way there. I set up my tent and other things a bit into the woods so as to not be right up against the lake. Then I unfolded my chair, popped open a beer, and listened to the calm sounds of the water and the birds chirping. It was already late into the day, so I didn't have much time before the sun started going down. I always enjoyed nighttime in the woods, though. It was always so quiet, and almost felt freeing in a way. I don't know how else to describe it. However, this night was different. Once the sun went down, I built up a campfire and continued relaxing. Yet this feeling came over me that usually didn't happen. I felt like I was being watched. I kept looking around at the trees and the darkness that surrounded me, having this uneasy, almost paranoid feeling. I was never like this, so I wasn't sure what was going on. Every time I looked around, though, I didn't see anything at all. The problem was that it was so dark. I'm not sure I would have been able to see anything, even if there was something or someone out there watching me. Of course, with no real reason to feel the way I did my best to suppress the thoughts and try to ease my mind away from it. Eventually, I was able to distract myself by thinking about some personal stuff I had going on in my life. It wasn't a fun distraction, but I guess it was better than being paranoid. Hours passed. I want to say it was about 10 or 11 by this point, when there was a very sudden and loud crack in front of me, like a large stick snapping under heavy weight from somewhere right ahead of me. It was pitch black out there. I couldn't see anything. The sound was so loud, though, it echoed across the woods. A shiver ran through me. It sounded like something heavy stepping on a branch. Was it a large animal, or was it a person? I wasn't sure which I was more afraid of. I pulled out my bear spray, then called out, "Hello, someone out there." There was not even the slightest sound in response to my voice. I couldn't help but feel like if it were a large animal, I would have heard them walking around, brushing up against the bushes and crunching the leaves. I kind of just sat there for a minute, staring out into the dark, and waiting to see or hear something before I'd remembered I'd brought a flashlight with me. I dug through my backpack and grabbed it, but by then it had already been a minute or two. And when I shined it out there, it was empty. Nothing out there at all. Obviously, I was starting to feel paranoid again, but this time it felt justified. I quickly tended to the fire, adding in some more wood to make sure it didn't burn out and stayed bright enough to light up my campsite. Every couple minutes, I turned my flashlight back on and just scanned the area. Then one time I turned it on, I immediately saw something at the far end of the light. It was a person, definitely a man. They were freakishly tall, not like inhuman or anything, but maybe like 65. They instantly moved out of the light, going further back where the light couldn't reach. My adrenaline was pumping. Had my gut feeling been right this whole time? I thought back to the sound I heard earlier, and how it sounded like something large, enough to make such a loud crack sound. The guy I saw was huge. At that height, he was probably 250 pounds at least. It had to have been him, which means he was out there watching me for who knows how long. I panicked, taking down my tent and shoving my belongings into my backpack. I knew which way he ran from the light, so I ran off in the opposite direction, which also happened to be back toward my car. After a while, I felt safe enough to turn on my flashlight on the dim setting and walk the rest of the way. While I walked, I tried to think up reasons for him being out there. Something definitely would have happened. I have no doubt about it, but the guy was huge. Why didn't he just attack me or rob me right away? Why wait and watch me? The only thing I could think of is if he might have been trying to see if I had a gun or a weapon on me, or he could have just been waiting for me to go to sleep. I got back to my car and drove home. I still go out camping, but it's never been the same since that night. Now I always have that paranoid feeling, like I'm being watched from somewhere that I can't see. Hopefully, it's just a feeling. This happened a while ago. I want to say 2014. I live in a pretty woodsy town, like with lots of forest around it, and plenty of small campgrounds within an hour or so. I had a 4-day weekend off from work, and I hadn't gotten out in a while. So I decided to head to one of these campgrounds for a laid-back weekend camping trip. The campground I chose was a small one, where you park in a small dirt area and choose one of the 3 sites they had to set up your tent at. There were already fire pits set up, and even some grills and benches. They looked awful, but I guess some people still use them. All 3 spots were open though, and no other cars were there. So I just chose the one on the far left and put all my things over there. The walk from my truck to the campsite was only about 5 minutes, but the area was very densely covered in trees, so it still felt like I was fully in the woods. Plus, the actual camping ground was about 45 minutes from town as well. It was about an hour in that I realized I had no idea what to do. Like, should I just sit here and relax or read a book? I didn't really know. I thought maybe there was a trail or something I could walk on. So I went back to where the entrance was to see if there was anything. There wasn't, but there was another car next to mine now. It was an old red Toyota, like really old, rusted all around, and with dents and scratches all over. And one really strange thing I noticed about it was it didn't have a license plate on either the front or the back. I didn't really know what to think, but I figured they must have been camping at one of the other spots. With no trail, though, I went back to my campsite and just sat on a log. After only 10 minutes, I heard footsteps coming up behind me. I looked back. There was a guy walking down the trail. He had no backpack or anything, and he was looking right at me, like he was coming down just to talk to me or ask me something. The man looked like he was in his 30s, but he almost looked older because of how he was put together, or rather not put together. His brown jacket had holes all over it and was covered in stains, and his beard and hair were oily and shaggy. "You wouldn't happen to be able to help me with something real quick, would you?" he asked. Having nothing to do, I said sure and stood up. But he quickly said thank you and that he was just asking for now. He still had some things to do first, but he was going to come back in a little bit and get me when he needed a hand. I said okay, and he thanked me again, then walked away. I wasn't too sure why he came by if he didn't need me right now, but I figured he probably just had to unpack his car first and would be back in 10 or 15 minutes. I sat and waited, but half an hour passed and then another. By then, the sun was going down, and I thought he must have gotten it done himself, whatever it was. 2 hours later, I'd completely forgotten about it. I had the fire pit lit up and was making my dinner when I heard footsteps behind me again. I looked back, but this time it was eerily dark. I could hear his footsteps coming down the trail, but he was completely covered in darkness. I couldn't even see his silhouette. I listened to the crunching steps against the gravel slowly make their way into the light of my campfire. It was the same man, just as I thought. I didn't understand why he came back, though. It was so late now. "Hey, you ready? Just need a little help still." With what?" He noticed my hesitation. "It'll only take a minute." "You aren't busy by the looks of it," he said jokingly with a smile. But it felt odd, like he was being pushy. He also avoided my question. My social awkwardness kind of failed me here, though, because I nervously agreed, knowing I really had nothing else to do, and it was obvious. He smiled again and started leading the way. As we got further from my campfire, it got way darker, and I realized how odd it was that he walked here without a flashlight. It also felt strange following him into the dark. "Hey, so what was it you needed my help for?" I asked. He slowed down for a split second, like he was going to say something, but then he continued walking and didn't answer. I felt my heart rate spiking. My body knew something was wrong. Suddenly, the silence of the forest around me felt disturbingly eerie, like a calm before the storm. I began slowing down, trying to put some distance between us without it being too obvious. I only managed to get a few feet away before he turned around and looked at me. He had a creepy fake smile that immediately shifted into a frown when he saw me further away. He stopped walking, and so did I. Before I could say anything, I saw his hand reach down into his jacket, and I immediately turned and sprinted deeper into the woods after just seeing the handle of what I could only assume was a knife. I could hear his footsteps pounding against the ground and his heavy breathing as he chased me through the dark for probably a good 2 minutes. He started slowing down, and eventually it was just the sound of me running through the woods. Luckily, I had my phone and keys on me, so I called 911. When they got to the camping grounds, only my truck was there. The red car was gone, and so was the man. I described everything for them, as both the car and the man had such a distinct look, but that information wasn't enough. I think it's pretty clear what was about to happen that night. But there doesn't seem to be any reason why, aside from the fact that I was camping alone. The way the man waited until night to try it, and how he came by during the day so that I'd be more likely to follow him later, is terrifyingly manipulative. I'm worried others may fall victim to it, or possibly already have. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more amazing video. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. All right, that's it for today. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. I live alone on 40 acres in northern Utah. Thought I was safe until I saw the same man from the grocery store standing by my house at 2 a.m., and his truck was parked deep in my field with the lights off. I live in northern Utah, on the edge of a small highway town. There's not really anything but a few stores, truck stops, and motels right up along the main highway. The roads to the outskirts are all dirt, just leading to a few other homes and large private acres of forest and grassy fields. This was a pretty typical day for me. I worked remotely from home and finished up around 6. From there, I headed into town to grab some groceries and stock up on a few items around the house. Even though it was a highway town, the highway wasn't actually all that busy, so none of the stores were ever too crowded. I pulled in and started shopping. While I was in there, though, I happened to notice a guy looking at me. At first, I thought nothing of it. I probably just looked over at him at an awkward timing while he happened to be looking over at me. I kept going about my shopping, but a couple minutes later, and in a different aisle, I saw him again in the corner of my eye. He walked into the same empty aisle I was in and stood just 5 or 6 feet to the side of me. I kept looking forward and tried to find what I needed, but I noticed he wasn't really moving around or grabbing anything, so I just shifted my eyes a little bit over so I could kind of see him better, even though I wasn't looking directly at him. I could tell he was looking at me. This time, I said hi, then continued about my business. The man didn't say anything back to me. I hurried up and grabbed what I needed and left the aisle. Honestly, I just thought the dude was a little weird, but I wasn't thinking too hard about it. I went to the checkout counter and paid for everything, then headed back out to my car. I parked in the far back of the lot, like I usually did. I tossed everything in the trunk and got in, and when I looked up at the rest of the parking lot, there were maybe 30 or 40 other cars, but something felt off. Then I saw him again. He was standing between a couple cars, looking over in my direction. He didn't have any groceries in his hands, so I don't think he even checked out or got anything. The hell was up with this guy? Probably some creepy trucker running on 2 hours of sleep or something. I pulled out of the parking lot and started heading home. The sun was mostly down by now, so the empty dirt roads were dark and quiet. I parked out front and brought in the first couple bags of groceries. While putting that stuff away, I got a little sidetracked by a phone call from my dad. But eventually I got back to it and headed back outside to my car to grab the rest of the groceries. When I did, I saw something. I had to squint and let my eyes adjust to the dark for a moment. But far out, and kind of off the side of the dirt road, there was a truck. Its lights were all off. I could only see the general shape of it, silhouetted by the night sky. I owned just under 40 acres of land, so where that truck was on my property. It definitely wasn't there when I drove home. And if it was just turning around, lost, why would it be parked with no lights on? I slowly walked up to my car and got my groceries out, keeping an eye on the truck the entire time. The best possibility I could think of was that it could be just some regular driver that pulled off the highway and thought that this empty land would be a good place to sleep instead of paying for a motel. Even though it was on my property, I wasn't going to make a fuss if I didn't have to. You never know who could be in there or what they might do. I went back inside. After tossing the groceries away, I opened up the curtains on the front of the house, just so I could keep an eye out there. Over time, say the next hour or so, I felt less and less nervous about it, and thought that it was almost surely a driver sleeping. Still strange, but harmless. I spent another hour in the living room, watching a show, and never saw the truck move. It was getting late, so I closed the curtains and went upstairs to get in bed. I think I fell asleep pretty quickly. However, in the middle of the night, I woke up having to use the restroom. I never checked the time, but I think it was probably 2 or 3 a.m. I got up half asleep and walked across the bedroom floor and into the hallway where the bathroom was. As soon as I opened the door, I heard a creak downstairs. I'd never heard that happen before. I listened for a second, then closed and reopened the door to see if it happened again, but it didn't. I walked to the end of the hallway and looked down the stairs. It was all dark down there, only a small amount of moonlight coming in from the kitchen windows. But there was something in that downstairs hallway. I could see a shadow moving ever so slightly on the side of the wall. I couldn't tell if it was actually in the hallway or maybe outside the back door, and the shadow was just reflecting onto the wall. But I immediately felt my heart pumping. I quietly backed up and went back into my room, closing the door as slowly and carefully as I could so as to not bring any attention. Then I got my phone and called the police. I kept my voice slow. For the first 5 minutes I waited. I didn't hear anything. I started doubting that they were in my home, until suddenly I heard creaking again, very slow and very subtle, walking across the floor below me. It sounded like they went into the living room. A minute later, a cop car showed up. There was a scurry of footsteps running around down there, and eventually leaving my home, just as the officers ran up. Thankfully, they caught him running back up toward the truck that was parked in the field. Disturbingly, I recognized him as the creepy guy from the store earlier. I guess he really was stalking me. Even worse than him following me and breaking into my home, he was armed. The guy claimed he was just trying to rob me, but from the looks of it, it seemed way more personal than that. And I don't know how long he was inside my home for, but he never took anything. He didn't even have a backpack to take anything with. Plus, he knew I was home. He probably was watching me from somewhere outside all night. What he really would have done is better left unknown. But first, did you know that 98% of people who watch my videos aren't subscribed? That means you. And yes, I am speaking specifically to you. Probably aren't. So now would be a great time to leave a like on the video and subscribe. Anyhow, this was during a road trip last summer. I was taking a long route home from visiting a few relatives, so I was driving about 4 hours each day to a different destination. This was after my last stop. Everything left on the last 8 hours of driving home was just empty woods, as far as I knew. There was another city I wanted to stop at, but it was just too far out of the way, for me to justify stopping there. From my previous stop, I left at 6 p.m. to get to my final Airbnb that I had booked at a cabin about 2 hours away. It happened to be on the route home, so that's why I went with it. I figured it'd be better than whatever cheap and crappy motel there was along the road. Where I was, the landscape was pretty flat, but there were a decent amount of trees scattered around. When I pulled up to the cabin, it was clear they had planted a row of large pine trees, perfectly in a line at the front of the cabin, with the gravel driveway going through the middle. Honestly, the outside of it, mixed with the landscape, was a little bit spooky. I parked and unlocked the padlock with the code I had emailed from the host. Despite the outside, on the inside, the cabin looked newly renovated, probably to be an Airbnb, but it was really nice. Small, but cozy. I didn't unpack much since I'd only be there for the night. I sat at the table and ate a meal I'd picked up from a drive-thru, but only 10 minutes after I'd gotten settled in, there was a knock at the door. It startled me because I never heard a car pull up or anyone walking outside. I got up and answered the door. There was a man looking about 40-ish with a gray and black beard and shaved head. "Hi, I was just stopping by to make sure you got in and everything was good," he said with a smile. Knowing it was just the host now, I said I was good and it was all great. I then said goodnight and shut the door. I thought it was a bit strange. He showed up unannounced, just to ask if I was okay, but I thought he must have lived close by. Or maybe even on the other side of the property, or something. Also, it's worth mentioning that the guy had an unusually strong odor coming from him. It smelled like maybe he'd been working out in the field all day. I just found it a bit odd as well. I went back to the table and finished eating, then took a shower to wind down for the night. I was only in there for maybe 5 minutes before feeling tired enough and just wanting to lay in bed already. I dried off and hopped in bed, staying on my phone for a little bit, when there was another knock at the front door. This one scared me just as much as the first time, because again, I never heard a car pull up or anyone walking outside. It had to be the host again. But why? And so soon, after he just came over. Immediately I knew this was odd and I felt really uncomfortable. I checked my phone, and of course there was no text or call from him. I slowly walked into the main room, hearing him knock several more times. I wasn't sure if I wanted to answer the door or not, but I ended up just calling out from the other side and asking what he needed. He stopped knocking. "Can you open the door, please? I just wanted to ask you one more thing. I'll be quick, I promise." I didn't respond for a few seconds because I honestly didn't know what to say. In those few seconds, he must have gotten impatient because he knocked on the door again and asked if I could open it. I said it was late and I wasn't in the mood, so if there wasn't an emergency, then I'd like to be left alone. He took a long time to answer after that. The silence was really eerie. Once it reached a whole minute, it was even more so. I didn't hear him walk away. So was he just standing out there? I quietly walked up and looked through the small window on the door. He wasn't out there. I immediately thought that he must have snuck away, because surely I would have heard his footsteps on the gravel if he just walked away. But then, where was he? I didn't know what to do. I felt really uncomfortable and didn't know why he was acting so strange. I stood there by the door for a minute and listened for anything. Honestly, I was scared to move. But then I happened to glance over at one of the windows in the living room. I saw his eyes staring into mine. I panicked and sprinted to the bedroom where I called 911. While I waited, I heard what sounded like him trying to lift open the window, which was terrifying but also odd, considering he had to have had a key to his own house. But that's when I figured it all out. That man wasn't the host. This was confirmed when police arrived. He'd already run off. We have no idea in which direction. But we got in contact with the actual host and owner of the cabin. I don't know what that man's intentions were that night. Obviously, he was lying and clearly plotting something, but I'm just glad I didn't open the door. It was spring break. I was 18, and this year, my family took a trip to a small cabin out in Minnesota. It was just me, my mom, and my younger brother, who was only 7 at the time. We were planned to stay at this cabin for the whole week, and part of the reason we were going to Minnesota was to check out some of the smaller towns and scout for a place we might want to move to in the future. Anyway, the cabin my mom booked, we had never been to before, and I don't think she knew how far out it was from the closest towns. She was probably more concerned on the price. It was really far north, and about 35 minutes out from any shopping areas. I guess it was a good test at how good we'd handle the rural life, though. The drive there was a little over 10 hours. I drove the first few hours, and my mom drove the rest. We got to the cabin at sunset. It was really pretty, the orange skies setting over the dense forest and wildlife, way different than the skyscrapers and massive office buildings we were used to. The cabin itself was noticeably old, however. Everything creaked, and it didn't look like the place was professionally built. It was fine, though. I mean, it was a cabin after all. We settled in for the night, testing out the wood-burning fireplace, and just resting after the long drive. I ended up napping for most of the evening. My mom went to bed around 8:30, but because I took a long nap, I stayed up a bit later. My little brother was also in his room, so it was just me hanging out in the cabin. I sat by the fireplace on my phone for a bit, then thought I'd get some fresh air and check out the back porch. It was a really small wooden deck with a sketchy-looking fire pit in the middle and a few chairs around it. I sat down and looked out into the forest. The night was really quiet. No cars or busy streets, just the occasional bird crowing in the distance and the trees rustling in the wind. I loved it. Being further up north, though, it was a bit more chilly than I expected. I spotted some logs stacked up on the side of the cabin and figured I'd give the fire pit a try. I lit it up no problem, and the fire stayed well maintained in the center, so I guess it wasn't as sketchy as I thought. Anyway, I sat by it for a while. I never get to do this sort of thing, so I just soaked it all in. After about 30 minutes of being outside, there was a very sudden and just completely out of nowhere sound from within the forest. Honestly, I had no clue what it could have been, but I did think that the way it sounded and echoed through the trees was kind of like an axe chopping into a tree or wood. It was only one sound, though, and I didn't think it was really possible for anyone to be out here near us. It was pitch black out there, so I couldn't see anything, but whatever it was, it sounded pretty close. As I stayed out there for the next 5 minutes after hearing the sound, I felt my nerves building up a little bit. Just this uneasy feeling that ruined the peacefulness from before. I ended up snuffing out the fire pit and heading back into the cabin. From the sounds of it, my mom and brother were asleep already. I still wasn't all that tired, though. I don't know if it was still from the long nap, or Maybe the sound I heard waking me up, but I still didn't really feel like going to bed yet. I stayed up in the living room on my phone. I had some movies downloaded, so I didn't have to worry about Wi-Fi. Only 15 or so minutes in, I heard something. I paused the movie and listened. I wasn't sure if it was the cabin creaking from someone waking up or walking around in their room, or maybe just wind hitting the walls. It gave me that uneasy feeling again, though. I wasn't used to being in this kind of environment, so I think that's why I got so easily unnerved. It was only a minute later that I heard it again, though. This time, it was from the opposite end of the cabin, not where the bedrooms were. It was from outside the wall, just next to me. The only thing there was a window. I leaned a little closer and listened. Just when I thought I might be hearing something, a loud sequence of knocks shook the front door. It vibrated across the wooden walls. I froze up for a moment, then heard my mom get out of bed and hurry into the hallway, asking what that was. I was standing up at this point, knowing something was wrong, but told her someone was at the door. I could tell she was pretty frightened too. She immediately went back to get her phone and called 911 because there was no reason for anyone to be banging on our cabin door in the middle of nowhere and in the middle of the night. As she did, I walked up to the door and looked out the peephole. It was extremely dark. There were no porch lights or anything, but I could see the basic figure of a man standing fairly close, just staring ahead at the door. And in the dark, I could see the outline of a heavy wooden axe in his hand. I felt my eyes widen and nerves spiking. Everything rushed through my mind. I tried to think of any reason this wasn't what it looked like. Like maybe he needed help, or was lost, or I don't know. Nothing seemed to explain this as being anything but bad. The man banged on the door several more times as my mom was on the phone with an operator. They never spoke, though, stating any excuse for them being here. They just aggressively knocked on the door. In the heat of the moment, it was hard to tell how much time passed. It felt like forever, though, but then he did what we were all terrified of. One loud crack slammed into the door, and the slightest bit of the metal axe pierced through the wood. At that point, we all ran into the farthest room and locked ourselves in. We heard more hits against the door, but only 4 or 5 before they stopped. We weren't sure if he'd busted the door down already, or if he had given up, but we just waited. It took just under 15 minutes for the first officer to arrive to the cabin, which was honestly quicker than expected, given how far out we were. The front door had several large gashes in it, but there were no signs of the man having gotten in. There were also no signs of where the man went. It's just assumed that he walked back out into the forest. The running theory is the guy was out in the forest when he saw my campfire from all the way out there, luring him to the cabin. It doesn't explain what he was doing out there at night with an axe, or why he came up to the cabin. But there's not really any way to know those things without him being caught and questioned. We obviously didn't stay there any longer. In case you were wondering, we didn't end up moving there either. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more amazing video. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. All right, that's it for today. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.